So today we're going to talk about salt, and not all salts are created equal, and there are better and worse choices. So let's start with refined salt. So refined salt either comes from a salt mine underground, or it comes from evaporated seawater. And then it goes through a process of refinement. So every time you see the word refined in a product, a red flag should show up in your mind, and you should go search and figure out what kind of refinement it is. There are very few foods that are refined, but they are naturally refined. That's not the case with the salt. So they apply bleach to it to make it nice and white. They also heat it at very, very high temperatures of 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, and that actually alters the chemical structure of the molecule and makes it a little bit foreign for the body. And also they add anti-caking agents so that the salt doesn't clump up and that you can serve, it'll pour smoothly out of the salt shaker. And so that kind of salt, the table salt, regular salt, is about 97.5% sodium chloride and nothing else, and then 2% chemicals. So what I mean by saying sodium chloride and nothing else means that they took everything out and there was only sodium chloride left, plus whatever chemicals they added in the processing, right? So in a quarter tablespoon of this salt, you'll get 590 milligrams of sodium. So it's the highest one in sodium because it just has sodium chloride on it. So no minerals are left in this one, plus some chemicals. So that would be the poorest choice in salt. It is, though, the cheapest one. And then the next one is kosher salt. And kosher salt is a little bit shady for me in terms of what I found to explain what it is. So I understood that it is the same origin, so salt mines or evaporated seawater, a little bit less refined than the table salt. The grains are a little bit bigger. So I'm imagining that because the grains are bigger, you get less sodium per quarter tablespoon, maybe. And it may or may not have anti-caking agents. I guess it depends on the manufacturer. That's what I found. So I guess that would be your next choice. So the next one is sea salt. And sea salt is from evaporated seawater, and no refinement, no bleaching, and I'm talking about the rock salt that you put in the grinder, okay? So it can vary in color just because of these trace minerals and where in the world it came from. So it can be a little bit brownish, a little bit yellowish, a little bit grayish, a little bit blackish. Anyway, it all depends on where it came from. And so it contains like 50 or more trace minerals depending on where it came from as well. So these minerals are the things that give it its coloring, and also they are good for us. And some of these minerals are electrolytes, so they keep us hydrated, they keep our muscles contracted, they have functions in our body, and so do the other trace minerals. The thing is that sea salt, since our oceans are all contaminated, you might be getting some heavy metals and some microplastics, unfortunately, in these, depending on where it came from. So the best choice in sea salt would be Celtic sea salt, and it is from a region in France called Brittany, and apparently the sea there is not as contaminated, and so this salt is a little bit gray, and it has a lot of trace minerals, and that's what gives it its grayish color, and it is said to be pure and not as contaminated with microplastics and heavy metals. And so it would be much lower in sodium as well because it doesn't have just sodium chloride. The next option would be Himalayan pink salt, and that is from Pakistan, and that is from salt caves, and it has 80 plus trace minerals, and that's also why it has that coloring, because of specific mineral content in there. And it's only 84% sodium chloride and then 16% trace minerals. And so in the same quarter teaspoon, now you're getting 420 milligrams of sodium as opposed to 590 in the refined salt. And sea salt would be a little bit more than the Himalayan because Himalayan has even more trace minerals, so it dilutes the sodium, but it would be much less than the refined salt. This one thing to note with the Himalayan pink salt is that you don't want to buy the very cheap ones, maybe not the ones from TJ Maxx, or discounted stores like that, because they might be contaminated. So this means that they were harvesting this salt from the more exposed areas of the salt cave. And so what does salt do? It pulls out impurities. So you're harvesting salt with a lot of impurities and then selling it. So the more expensive, better origin salts are the ones deeper inside those caves, and so they are more pure. So just as a note, if you want to search salt caves, there are, I think there's one here in Birmingham, but there's these salt rooms that you can go in. They're all covered in salt. It's like a little igloo made of salt, and they are excellent for respiratory problems like asthma and sinusitis and all that. Because salt pulls out. Ugh, my goodness, what's wrong? Salt pulls out impurities, and so that's why you wash your nose, and even you use saline in your eyes and stuff just to pull out those impurities. And you know how when you have a sore throat you gargle with salt water? That's also why. One of the reasons why. Well, that said about the salt, now you know how to choose your best salt. And the thing is, salt is very good, so it keeps you hydrated if it has electrolytes. If it's just sodium chloride, it does nothing for you except flavor your food. That is all it does. It actually can dehydrate you, right? Because salt can pull water as well. So you want to use salt in balance. You don't want to salt your food too much. One, because it is corrosive. So if you have gastritis or any GI issues, ulcers, salt is very corrosive. You can see that in the environment, right? If you put salt in some kind of metal, it'll just rust it all out. Also, because too much salt alters your microbiome for the worst. And also because it may elevate your blood pressure. And the blood pressure thing is a very genetic influenced thing. Not every person will elevate their blood pressure with salt. So that's something to keep in mind. Don't, just because you're using a very good salt doesn't mean that you can put as much as you want. But it's not something to be very afraid of if you're using good salt and if you're using it to cook, right? If you're using it to cook, you don't really have to measure out your salt. You can use it as much as you want to taste the way you want. The thing with the salt is the processed junk, right? The ones that, the chips and the deli meats and all that, because they use very bad quality salt, and two, it is a lot in there.